Welcome to the Invention Licensing Show. I'm your host, David Fedewa, and I'm here to help you license your product. Today, we're going to jump into a mini-series on the must-haves in licensing contracts. So to jump right into it, the must-haves of licensing contracts. I'm going to get into number one because it's the structure of the entire deal. And it's the thing, most inventors, they get their licensing contract and they flip through every page until they find the royalty agreement or the royalty rate, and they're like, all right, I'm good. But in reality, and that's something that I did personally, right? I flipped through, I saw that 5% or 7%, and I was like, all right, I'm good to go. But now that I've been in the business so long, I've helped inventors sign over 170 licensing deals. I've seen a lot of contracts. I've helped people negotiate these deals. And the core of the entire contract is based off the grant. The grant is the center of the spider web, and everything else comes out from there. So when I find a licensing contract, I flip to, it's usually on the first page, sometimes on the second, but it is the grant of license. And the way the grant of license works is it's similar to when you're selling a house. Because when you sell a house, and if you're familiar with the process of selling houses, or if you've ever bought or sold a house, the buyer is giving the seller money for what? The what is the deed to the house. And so in a licensing agreement, the grant defines what that is. So the licensee, which is the company, licensor is the inventor. So the company is getting what for what. And so when the grant is structured, the grant says typically licensor grants to licensee, ... Or, and that ... is how the whole deal is structured and why I say it's the core. Because you can start to read the grant and that will spiderweb out to the rest of the contract. To give you like a hard example, licensor grants to licensee the rights to the product. How the product is defined determines a lot about how the deal will work. Because if you define the product as the granted intellectual property or granted patents, well then the deal is based off a patent. If they say that the product is defined as attached and it's just a sell sheet, well then it's based off the product. So I like deals that a lot of times that are based off of both, because then you have a scenario, because now with the USPTO and the new systems that they have, patents can be invalidated. So if your licensing deal is structured off of having a granted patent, well then somebody can come along and invalidate your patent, and then your licensing deal is invalidated along with it. So when you have your licensing deal and the grant of license, so licensor grants to licensee blank, and what that blank is your product. How they define that product will determine a lot going into the future. And so when they say let's say the product is defined as a granted patent. Well, now you as the inventor need to go and make sure the patent gets granted, and then you need to make sure that it stays granted. But if the product is defined as a granted patent, if available, or the attached sell sheet, well, you can't invalidate a sell sheet. And so that is like a very core fundamental thing of a licensing agreement, is what's getting transferred. And so they're giving you a royalty or consideration for what? That for what is defined in product. And so making sure that you have an understanding of what it is that you're delivering to them is the fundamental core structure of the contract. So you make sure, because I have a lot of inventors that they read these contracts and then they don't understand that they need to go get a granted patent to have this contract stay valid. And so understanding licensor grants to licensee the product defined as whatever the definition. And so then understanding that, let me take the grant a step further. So licensor grants to licensee the product to sell, use, manufacture, and distribute throughout the world exclusively in all categories. What that all means is that they get the rights to the entire world, and they get the rights to all categories. That can be changed. That can be negotiated. You can license a portion of the rights. I've had licensing deals where we're just licensing big box store rights. And so we list out 10 stores. So that contract read similar to licensor grants to licensee, the product to sell, use, manufacture, and distribute to big box stores. Big box stores defined in Appendix A, and then you'd have a list of all the big box stores that they get an exclusive right to license in. And so do you see how the core of your licensing contract, basically everything that has to do with like building the contract out starts with the grant, because you're determining what they get, where they get to sell it, how they get to sell it, and that's pretty much the core of, and the fact that you get paid. And so the getting paid comes into considerations, which I'm going to get to that in the next video. But for the grant, if you want to get good at licensing contracts, start reading from the grant out. Also, it defines who the licensor is. Who is the licensee? Licensor should not be you as an individual. Licensor should be your company name. InventTribe LLC should be on the contract, for example, not David Fedewa. That's a level of protection that a lot of people need to have when they're getting into these licensing agreements. And so do start to read licensing contracts. And since this is a mini-series, what is very important to understanding licensing agreements is this is something that really helped me early on in my career when I was trying to understand licensing contracts and agreements, is that when you read one contract, let's say you get your first licensing contract and you read it, you don't know if it's good or bad because you've never read one before. And you have a bunch of assumptions in your head that, you know, oh, I need this, I need this, I need this. I've heard people say on YouTube, I need to put this. And so then you're like, then my contract is bad or good, but I don't have any reference points. But as soon as you read a second licensing contract, now you can take an improvements clause of one and an improvements clause of the other, and you can compare them. And the more reference points that you have of comparing improvements clauses, comparing grants of license, then the better understanding you have of your own licensing contract. So I tell all of my students, read 2, 3, 4 licensing contracts before it's time to get your contract, because you need time to absorb that information and understand the differences between the two. So when you get your contract, you can read through and say, that's not a very good improvements clause. I want mine like the third contract that I read. And you're able to take those clauses out and put them in. It's not that simple, but essentially that's what you're going to be doing. And so through this mini series, if you can get your hands on licensing contracts, do read through as many as you can so you can understand how to use licensing contracts, clauses, and how they compare to each other, so you're not necessarily just reading your licensing contract for the very first time and don't have any context if it's good or bad, but have those reference points to say, yeah, these are good clauses or these are bad clauses. So I hope that helps you understand grant of license and the rest of the licensing contract aspects. Thank you for tuning in to the mini-series on licensing contracts with InventTribe. If you want more information, check out inventtribe.com. The next video we're going to get into is royalty rate and net sales definitions.